I'm ready.
Okay, and we're live.
All right, welcome to the January 29th, 2024 meeting of the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees. The meeting is being held in person with committee members participating remotely. At this time, Board Secretary Michelle Carreri will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person when your name is called.
Robbie Luna, Matthew Lenz,
Present via WebEx.
Joseph Formicola. Joseph, I think you may be on mute, Joe.
Sorry about that. Present via WebEx.
No problem. Richard Humphrey, Reva Goyal, David Caprio, Michael Gray, Mark Paulange.
Present via WebEx.
Okay. And also Board Chair Margot Cook and Vice Chair Armin Saptoni are present and participating as invited guests. We do not, unfortunately, have a quorum, but at least I can call the meeting to order. But unfortunately, we can't take formal action on the minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. So yes, we'll make some adjustments here. The approval of the minutes and the agenda item 3 executive session will be deferred to the next meeting of the committee. Just as a reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and the note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion, or second to a motion, which we're not going to be doing today. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on as remote members, and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional homeland of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. So skipping over the approval of the minutes, we'll dive right into the discussion items. And I believe we're going to start with the review of the affirmative action plan, and I'll turn it over to Kara Larson and Dorsa. Dorsa, am I pronouncing that right?
Dorca.
Thank you.
Dorca, I apologize. I sincerely apologize, but Dorca, I'll make note of that the next time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Just briefly, you might recall that in November, Dorca gave you an overview of affirmative action planning, and then we have since submitted our FY22-23 affirmative action plan to the state of Rhode Island. And so Dorca is going to go over a little bit of our affirmative action plan with you. Dorca, are you going to share your screen?
Thank you, Kara.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon. Bear with me for a second while I share my screen. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Dorca, I think maybe it's just me, but it doesn't, if the microphone is close to you.
Thank you, President Perlange. I have increased my volume. Is that better?
Better, thanks.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon. It is a pleasure to join you again. As Kara said, my name is Dorca Smalley, and I am the director of the Office of Equal Opportunity. The Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee invited me in the fall to do a brief presentation about affirmative action compliance. And since then, we have completed the fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23 affirmative action plan. And I am here to give you a summary of where we stand. So on the agenda today, we are going to discuss the state affirmative action plan, the standards for the collection of demographic data, the fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23 affirmative action plan highlights, as it relates to faculty and staff representation in the workforce, applicants versus new hires. How are we doing when we compare the URI workforce to the applicant pool? We are going to also show you the underutilization analysis and discuss briefly some current actions that the university is taking to promote affirmative action compliance and also in support of the President's strategic plan. So the state affirmative action plan is for the reporting period fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23. The fiscal year 22 is from the reporting period of July 1st to June 30th of 2022 and includes a snapshot of the workforce data as of June 30th, 2022, the last day of the fiscal year. That is what we are required to do by the state of Rhode Island when reporting our data, and also by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. The fiscal year 23 portion is a retroactive plan. So you will notice that there are no goals. There are some goals, but not numeric goals as it relates to the hiring of underrepresented groups. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The plan was signed by the president and it was submitted to the Department of Administration, Division of Diversity and Inclusion, now known as DEDI, on November 2nd, 2023, and we are pending signature and approval from them. I don't expect any challenges, as in the past they actually have approved every plan we have. So what are the standards for the collection of demographic data? The United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, as well as the Rhode Island Department of Administration, Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion have established the standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting workforce data as it relates to the state affirmative action plan. The demographic information that we collect, we have 7 categories: Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, White, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and 2 or more races. The standard for sex reporting, this is a question that often comes up. We only have 2 options, and those are male or female. In addition to race, ethnicity, and sex, we also report disability and veteran status. Now, the preferred method of collection is self-identification. We ask employees to offer their demographic information voluntarily. During onboarding, we also ask the same of applicants. If a candidate or new hire declines to self-report, the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission tells us in the guidelines that we may collect the information based on observation or by review and an identification. That may include, for example, a driver's license, which includes the biological sex in most cases, or a passport, which includes national origin. And then our HR staff need to be trained to know how to classify individuals into one of the 7 categories. So let's dive into the affirmative action plan and what representation looks like in the workforce. So as of June 30th, 2022, the University of Rhode Island had 2,634 staff, of which 15.20 identified as minorities, 84.7 as white, 42.4 as male, 57.6 as female, 1.6 as disabled, and 2.40 as veteran. And you may be wondering, Dorca, how come when we add the number of minorities, the percentage of minorities, and the percentage of whites, it doesn't equal 100%? That's a great question. A very small number of staff did not disclose their information. I think about 3 or 5, so that's why the percentages don't add up. You may find more information in the workforce data charts on the plan. Now, applicants versus new hires. As of June 30th, 2022, during that entire fiscal year, the University of Rhode Island received applications for employment. 7,511 individuals applied for jobs. 395 were hired into positions during that fiscal year. Of those hired, 19.6% of the applicants, 19.6% were minorities. Of those hired, 20% were minorities, which is incredibly significant when we look at the applicant pool. For example, here at URI, we collect information and group applicants and job seekers into the same category. The number of applicants includes those who were not interviewed. So that is significant when we see that an agency has the same percentage of new hires as the percentage of applicants. We see that it's a positive trend that demonstrates that the agency is making efforts to comply and to hire members of underrepresented groups. We do not differentiate between job seekers and applicants. What is the difference, you may be wondering? Well, a job seeker is any person who applies for a job. An applicant, when we look at the federal definition of an applicant, the OFCCP notes, is somebody who meets the minimum qualifications for the job and who does not withdraw from the interview process until an offer of employment is made. So when we compare whites, we see that 39.6% of the applicants were white and 80% of the new hires were white. 28.7% of the male applicants, 37.7% of the new hires were male. Now we see another interesting trend here when we look at females, another area where the university did very well. Only 30.5% of the applicants were female identifying, but 62.3% of the new hires were female. I would also like to bring your attention to the individuals who identified as disabled. We see here that 3.5% of the individuals who applied for jobs disclosed their disability status, and 3.3% of the new hires were disabled, which is huge. Also veterans, you can see that we did very well in that category.
Can I ask a question, Dorka, before you leave that?
Yes.
If you don't mind, Matt, sorry. I noticed that your number of applicants, your percentages of applicants don't add up to 100. Is that because there's 40% of applicants that don't identify their race?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So 40.82% of the applicants did not disclose their race because, as you noticed from the previous slide, when we talked about data collection, we noted that voluntary self-identification is the primary method of collection of demographic data. And as it relates to the applicants, you can't really classify the applicants based on observation or an ID because we don't need them unless we interview them. So that is why the percentages do not add up.
And the reporting doesn't require you to indicate percent unidentified and how many of the unidentified were hired?
Not in the affirmative action charts. I have the practice of including that information in the narrative. So when you see the final affirmative action plan, page 121, includes that information, actually breaks down the percentage by the number of individuals who didn't disclose.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question.
Dorka, I had a
Barbara, I got
question
one.
too.
Oh, yeah, go ahead,
Sorry,
Margaret.
it could be, okay, sorry, Matt. It could be that I'm just a little dense. I'm just not getting the picture. So if minorities are 19.6% and 20% applicants, but then it's 39.6% of explain the 80% new hires
Yes.
that are white, and relative to the comparable pool of minorities that were applicants.
Thank you. That is another great question. So I am going to clarify. So the percentages here, the applicants include every job seeker, everyone who applied for a job, regardless of whether they met the required skills and qualifications, regardless of the education level of the person, and regardless of whether they withdrew from the interview process at any point until an offer was made. Why it's significant that 19.6% of applicants were minorities and 20% were hired? Because when I have looked at the United States Census data, that includes information for individuals who hold bachelor's degree and higher, you will notice that as the degree requirements go up from bachelor's to master's to PhDs, the selection pool of applicants actually gets slimmer and slimmer. And for that reason, it makes it more difficult for you to even have a percentage of hires that matches the pool of applicants. If you review the underutilization analysis in the affirmative action plan, actually included a chart that includes those percentages. So when we look at degree attainment rates, individuals who identify as white tend to hold master's degrees, PhD degrees, and Juris Doctorate degrees at a higher rate than those that are minorities. Does that answer your question?
So do you have that many more people, to Alyssa's question, that are not identifying in the applicant pool, but did identify in the hired pool? Is that the difference? Yeah, it must
No,
be.
that is not the difference. Well, yes and no. So in terms of new hires, we have the opportunity for those who decline to offer this information voluntarily to either use observation as a method or to review an ID.
I think at the time of application, they're not required to disclose this information, but then subsequently after they are hired, we
Right.
then are required to report this information, whether through their self-identification or through verification through some other means, including license or observation. And so we then
Have 100% that are hired versus only 60 that you can identify in the applicant process.
exactly.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that 19.6% of the applicants identified as minorities, 39.6 are white, and then we know for a fact that 40.82% did not disclose.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a question on, and this might be something that is a question for, I don't know, another time, might be outside the scope, but are we seeing the type of applicant numbers that we want to see from underrepresented communities? I'm not sure what the target percentage number is. I don't know if you have one in your mind.
Absolutely, that is a great question. May I answer that on the last slide?
Okay. Oh, you do. You answer it in the last slide of this. Oh, great. Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mark, I saw your hand up. Mark?
Thanks, Abby. Dorka, I don't want to interrupt you anymore, but Matt, if I can, I just wanted to note that our Vice President for Community Equity and Diversity, Markeisha Miner, is also on the call. And I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to meet with her, but she joined. I don't see her but I see her on the right on the list. So welcome, Markeisha. Yeah.
Welcome.
And I'll just add, if I may, that Markeisha, as the Vice President for CED, I think will be a great partner for Dorka Polino-Smiley, who's in my organization overseeing our affirmative action program. So it takes a lot of people to make sure that we're reporting correctly and, most importantly, meeting our strategic plan objectives. So thanks for being here, Markeisha.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, President for Lynch. I'm looking forward to meeting and working with Markeisha. All right, so I'd like to be respectful of your time. I believe I have about 2 more slides that we'll go over. This slide is the underrepresentation analysis, and it shows you make comparisons between the URI workforce, the United States labor force, which means individuals ages 16 through 64. Those underage and those who are required are excluded from the labor force percentages. And we make comparisons between the United States labor force and the Rhode Island labor force because we don't only recruit locally, we're an institution that recruits nationally and in fact internationally as well. So how are we doing in comparison to the selection pool? And there's some information on page 104 of the affirmative action plan. But in terms of representation, URI, we know that 15.20% of staff identified as minorities. 47.1% of the US labor force identifies as minorities, and this includes 2 or more races, by the way. And 32.7% of the Rhode Island labor force identifies as minorities. In terms of whites, 84.7% of the URI workforce identified as white, 63.3% of the US labor force, and 73.6% of the Rhode Island labor force. When we look at males, males made up 42.4% of the URI workforce, 36.3% of the US labor force, and 35.3% of the Rhode Island labor force. females. Female identified individuals made up 57.6% of the URI workforce, which I think is impressive. 36.2% of the US labor force and 35.9% of the Rhode Island labor force. Those who identified as disabled made up 1.6% of the URI workforce and make up 7.7% of the US labor force and 8.2% of the Rhode Island labor force. And those who identified as veteran made up 2.4% of the URI workforce, 5.20% of the US labor force, and 4.8% of the Rhode Island labor. So back to your question, Matt, what are we going to do to make sure that we foster a workforce that reflects the communities that we serve? So these are some of the current actions that the Division of Administration and Finance is taking in collaboration with divisions across campus. I'm looking forward to meeting Markeisha and working with community equity and diversity to help us meet some of these goals. We are making changes to the recruitment, selection, and hiring process through the policy and employee recruitment, selection, and hiring. The Office of Human Resource Administration has been an incredible partner, and we have been working to create procedures to support the new policy. Robin Santini, who's an amazing colleague and collaborator. We're also making changes to transfer and promotion practices, making efforts to maximize opportunities in advancement for members of underrepresented groups. We are going to be working with the Diversity Officers Working Group to better align hiring and recruitment goals to what the individual colleges and departments are doing to recruit and retain talent. We are working on training for search committee members and hiring authorities. The training will focus on talent acquisition as well as civil rights compliance, including affirmative action compliance, and understanding roles, responsibilities, and how the selection pool may influence outcomes. The most effective tool to increase affirmative action compliance and increase representation in the workforce is outreach. So finally, we are working on a comprehensive civil rights compliance toolkit. We have been working on this for months and have over 260 service organizations, job posting boards, associations that target specific areas of expertise and members of the population. So we're looking forward to introducing that, the training and the toolkit to our community, hopefully sometime in the spring.
Thank you so much, Dorka. This was really great. A question before I open it up to, I see Margot's got her hand raised. You know, I think we definitely got to do better, right? It doesn't reflect us specifically in the minority population, doesn't reflect the Rhode Island population. So I think we need to do better there. But you mentioned before that there was a, you know, about qualifications and degree, you know, as you go up, bachelor's, professional degrees, etc., the pool shrinks. So how much of this is you think us needing to implement these suggestions that you just did, that you just stated, versus, you know, just the problem with not having a large enough pool as well? You know, is there a constant tension there?
Absolutely, and that's what makes URI such an amazing institution to work for, because not only do we get to ask these questions, but as a higher ed institution, we get to be the answer for a lot of these the problems that society faces. This is an issue that we see across the board that does not only affect higher education. I saw it in my past employment with the judicial branch, and I see it with other agencies that I collaborate with.
Thank you. All right, Chair Cook.
I think you're muted, Margot.
All right, I was probably much smarter sounding when I was muted. This is probably a question for the president, and as Markeisha and who I'm also looking forward to meeting, gets her feet on the ground and understands more about the university. But I think it would be helpful for the board to have some KPIs around this so that we understand not just like what the end goal is, but what's the path to get there, and how do we measure whether we're whether and how, as Matt's talking about, we're succeeding in our efforts. So that'd be one thing. And I think I'd rather, we can do it at the board level, or we can do it, you know, at the president level. But either way, I think we need to understand some numbers about what success would look like over time. But I also would encourage us to, I know that we have to look at the labor force because of probably more for policy reasons. And, you know, you would know more about that than I would. But I think generally it'd be more meaningful to look at our peer group and understand relative to those populations, and to the point that you're both making around, you know, what's the pool that you can hire from. The Rhode Island labor force is, you know, it's somewhat helpful. The U.S. labor force is somewhat helpful, but it's really the university population, and to understand how we reflect inside our peer groups, I think would be helpful too. So I think some KPIs and some goals along the way would be good, so we know how we're progressing. And then whether a more relevant peer group would also help us understand some of the constraints of the general labor force.
Yeah, so thank you, Margot, for that. I mean, there's a lot tied in, both obviously for the state population, but also I think your point was well taken, and it would be interesting to compare with, you know, our peer group being, you know, other public land grant universities in the Northeast, you know, where they're going. So,
and it also shows us where our work is cut out for us, and we know what we need to do. So it's not excusing it in any way, but I think that's where the KPIs come in. Like, what are our goals, and how do we get there?
yeah, and then I think we should also then update, you know, some of the action. You asked about the pathways. How do we get there ultimately? So that we can also speak to.
Awesome. Who else has questions? Seeing none, I'm gonna, Dorca, thank you for your time today. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's very important work, and thank you for that presentation. Moving on. We have, the next discussion item is an update on Title IX regulations. So Kara, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So for a year now, I have been telling this committee that the new proposed regulations that were published in June of 2022 are going to be finalized and made effective. First, it was May of 23, then September of 23, and then they said March of 24. Well, word came down today that March is not in the cards either. The Department of Education has yet to submit the proposed final version of the regulations to the Office of Management and Budget, and they generally take around 120 days to do their review, which is required before regulations can be published. So the best guesstimate now is that we will have those new regulations in May, which would then shorten the implementation period, because undoubtedly they would need to be effective sometime in August before a school year starts. But I also want to report that we do have finalists for the Title IX coordinator position. So we will be able to have a full-time Title IX coordinator on board to hit the ground running with those new regulations and implementation of them.
All right, the Title IX regulations continue. Any questions? All right, thank you for that update. We will now move on to item C, review compliance with standards governing the conduct of research with Bethany Jenkins and Elizabeth Buchanan. Turn it over to you folks.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Nice to see everybody. Happy belated New Year. I am just thrilled to be introducing our new Associate Vice President for Research Administration, Elizabeth Buchanan, who will lead this discussion. But she's been a key hire on my team, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have her talking to you today.
Well, Elizabeth, welcome to this this position and to this group here. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Cook and Vice Chair Lenz, all of the trustees, President Parlange, and colleagues. So as Bethany said, my name is Elizabeth Buchanan. I'm the new AVPR. I began mid-September, so I've been here now a few months. Things are making a bit more sense with each day, but it's been a really good experience, and I really am enjoying my colleagues and the university as a whole. So thank you to many of the folks on this call that have made my life easier the last few months. I come from the University of Wisconsin system, where I was at UW Milwaukee and then UW Stout for 21 years. And then the past 3 years, I spent at what's called the Marshfield Clinic Research Institute, which is the research arm to a rural health system here in Wisconsin and Michigan, excuse me. Throughout my career, I've been a faculty member and then held an endowed chair in ethics position, and then found my way into research administration. My PhD is largely in ethics, and I consider myself an ethicist throughout the day. So as the AVPR, many of you will probably know this position, but I'll just give a few areas that I have oversight of. Research integrity, which includes the Institutional Review Board, the IACUC, which is the Committee for the Protection of Animals in Research, the Institutional Biosafety Committee, our Diving Safety Program, responsible conduct of research, conflict of interest, sponsored research, and generally anything outside of that bucket that's research operations. I have an amazing team in place, but I was listening with great interest about the workforce conversation. Thank you, Dorka, for your presentation, because since I've been here, I think as many of us are seeing, there are challenges in the workforce. Since I started, I have really been in a rebuilding mode. Our unit is growing in line with the strategic initiatives of the university. We are growing in research. If we do hope to get to an R1, the research infrastructure is critical to move along with the support for our faculty and staff across the university. So unfortunately, let me spin the positive light. Two of our longtime director and associate directors had retired from the time that I interviewed and started the position. We lost our director of research integrity, and then our associate director for pre-award retired just in November. So, with two key openings, I was a little unsteady, I have to admit, but the team really rallied and pulled together so that we have not had any lapses, anything fall through the cracks. We've kept the wheels on the bus, if you will. We have made two key hires. We have hired in the Director of Research Integrity, Ms. Linnea Lau, and secondly, for our pre-award, Ms. Kate Hayden. Interestingly, we can add to our veterans. Those individuals are both former, Kate still in the Coast Guard, and Linnea comes from the Air Force. We've also done some strategic hiring with a new position that we just unveiled last week, 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that I was hearing, and folks around the call probably have heard at some point, research is complex, it's messy, there's lots of moving parts, there's different facets of the research enterprise, and it's oftentimes very difficult for our new faculty and staff, even for our folks that have been here for a while, to really understand the navigation. So we hired, we have an interim research concierge and project manager that has just hit the ground running. Linda Laporte, who has been with URI for some years, but has come into this role on an interim basis while we search for the permanent position. We've also done something, and some of this will be a little in the weeds, and I'll come out of the weeds very quickly, but we also did some key changes with our sponsored research area and created what's called an intake award, so that from the time we get a notice of award from a sponsor or a funding agency, we're able then to make that process for our faculty and staff to really get going with their projects. So the award intake was another strategic shift in our hiring. I am spending a lot of time with hiring. We have positions that were given to us through the research division to support the growth that we are experiencing and that we're anticipating. I do want to call attention again back to the workforce issue. The research administration workforce is aging. Many folks retired during the pandemic. Many folks moved out of this profession, given the complexity, given the changes in workloads, and so we are not any different than other institutions in feeling the pain for the workforce. We unfortunately just had a failed search for one of our positions. And so we're really having to be creative in thinking about how we can adequately staff research administration going forward. I don't think it's inappropriate for me to call attention to this. For example, with our specialist positions, these are the folks that are working with grants and contracts. We do require them to have bachelor's degrees. And I've tried to find out, is this a state requirement, a union requirement? And it sounds like perhaps both. But what that does is it does cut off a big portion of our potential workforce, folks that might have an associate's and years of experience. So I would say from an institutional perspective, even a risk perspective, we do need to be creative in how we re-envision our workforce for research administration, because we will be seeing additional retirements. Folks have been with us 20, 30 years, and they're going to be taking a lot of institutional memory and history with them. One of my concerns as I think about institutional risk, in addition to my compliance concerns, it is with that aging workforce, and as we lose that institutional memory. So something that is really present for me is thinking about standard operating procedures, really getting up to speed, better documentation, and succession planning. I have mentioned succession planning to our risk team, and I think we're all in agreement that we do need to realize that we're not all going to be working forever, and take succession planning seriously and as an institutional commitment. So let me quickly turn to some of the compliance areas that
Elizabeth,
we've
can I just,
addressed.
can I
Yes,
hold you up
sorry.
for 1 second? No,
Yeah.
this was a lot of great information, so thank you. So a couple questions. The concierge research position, is that a newly created position?
It is,
Great,
yes,
great.
it is.
Could we,
I'm sorry.
could we just track the performance of like how that new position is working out? Is it accomplishing the goals that we wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. We have data. I've come from, I'm a researcher myself, so data is extremely important for me. So I'm always looking at key performance indicators, how can we do better? One of the things that in research administration that we haven't really done here at URI yet is really a mapping of research activity. And I think Bethany and I have had these conversations that in order to do better, in order to know where are we lacking, we need data. We need to be able to look at some data and some analytics. And so that's a key consideration for me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. On the position you just talked about where we had a failed research position, did we get any feedback from the candidates on why that was a failure that you're able to share?
Salary. Unfortunately, salary is a bit low. I
Are
will
we not
say
competitive with our peers, or?
the challenge is that there are so many positions open in this space right now that it is truly a buyer's market. And it was about what the candidate wanted to what we could offer. It was about a $5,000 difference. But the candidates are also getting 3-4 offers.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's tough. We do have, we're working through the remote work. My sponsored research team has been hybrid, coming in 1 day a week. That is also not desirable to many folks in our staffing, right, in our space right now. So
Okay, thank you.
we're
And then my
looking
last
at
thing, it's
that.
not really a question, it's more of a comment, but you mentioned about the widening the pool with maybe changing some of these requirements. I know that this is also a problem with the with the IT side of things too, where you know you have the degree requirements that are narrowing the pool. I'd really love to see, at least for me, and obviously it's up to the rest of the board as well, but you know, a breakdown of why we have these particular requirements, you know, if we should change them, how we should change them if we want to. That would be something great to look at a future meeting.
I would very much like to have that conversation. The information that I've received, both from the PSA union as well as folks, is that it's a state requirement in some of the job descriptions. So it would take, it's not just URI that's dealing with this.
And if I
Thanks for
might just jump
Yeah.
in here on HR, so we've recently gone through quite an effort to update our sort of central hiring policy that we're going to be bringing to the board for review and discussion, which really tries to modernize some of the existing policies and procedures. And of course, we have to continue to be in line with collective bargaining agreement and state requirements, but it addresses a lot of the questions you're asking, and also around search committees and training. And so we're hoping that that will be a step in the right direction to be thoughtful and look at modernizing some of our HR policies and procedures. So more to come on that.
I should have known you were already on top of it, Abby.
It's a lot of work. A lot of people have been putting work into it. So we'll have more to share soon.
And,
All right, Elizabeth, back to you.
and I'm going to jump in very, very quickly just to say that we've, since Elizabeth started, we've pretty much had an open position on a rolling basis. We fill them, we advertise the next one, or sometimes it's concurrent advertisement. And we've been putting a very high volume workload onto HR, and they've been incredible partners with our team and really helping us expedite our search processes. So, you know, we have nothing but good things to say about our partnership with HR in this process. They've been invaluable so that we could be hiring.
Absolutely, yeah. We're on calls and emails every day. They have been a huge help. So yeah, thanks, Bethany, for that. Okay, let me, any other comments there? Otherwise, I'll just conclude with a report of what has been submitted compliance-wise. So we have a very lengthy compliance calendar that guides us. And so since I started, there are five things that have been acted upon. The first, and I think probably to this group most important, is the required Public-Private Partnership Act report that goes to the Rhode Island Ethics Commission each year. I unfortunately learned that we missed a year or so on this, but we've got that back in track, and things are on track with the Ethics Commission. The purpose of this report is to document how many exemptions, and I think many of you were part of the group that approved Azure Sigler's exemption request last year for her business. For folks not familiar with this, the Public-Private Partnership Act is required when folks have their own business. We have a handful of faculty who have businesses and are state employees. So this just ensures that the state is comfortable, the commission is comfortable with the relationship that those faculty have. The second is our semi-annual inspections. This is for our animal facilities. So twice a year, we have inspections of all of the locations, all of the areas that our USDA animals are housed in. Our animal team, I can't say enough good things about them. These are the folks that are cleaning the cages, feeding the animals, you know, making sure these animals are comfortable in their space in the labs, ensuring that our faculty and scientists, when they come in, the animals are healthy, and this is a key area. So a huge thanks to the animal care team. Just in, it is still January, yeah, earlier this month, we submitted our Section 117 report to the Department of Education. And this is a required report that's done through, it's a collaborative effort, and we report on any foreign gifts and contracts over $250,000. So that was recently submitted. And then we did have a required USDA civil rights report. Dorka alluded to the toolkit that they are working on. And thank you, Dorka. Dorka and her team were instrumental in getting the response to USDA taken care of. And then finally, in process, we will submit our annual report to the Office of Research Integrity on activities related to misconduct. At this time, we have one active case currently in what's called the inquiry stage. If my notes are correct, I believe you were briefed on the misconduct policy last year, but I'm happy to talk about anything with that policy. Otherwise, that is all I have to report at this time. I think by next year, God willing, hopefully I will have figured everything out, and we'll come back to this group with more good information for you. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions for Elizabeth? All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much. And again, welcome to the University of Rhode Island. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you so much.
And now on to our last discussion item, which is an update from Krypton Larson Allen LLP on NCAA agreed upon procedures in single audit. And we have we got a team here, Abby, Angela, and Mike. So I'll turn it over to this gang here.
Great, thank you, Matt. And Mike is going to walk us through this discussion, but I just wanted to give some framing comments, which is that I think you recall Mike Johns. He is at CLA and has reported to the Board of Trustees on their review of our audited financial statements. But CLA also is involved in two other significant efforts for us, which Mike's going to talk about today. So one is reviewing our NCAA agreed upon procedures submission, and then the second is our single audit, which is a federal audit that rolls up to the state of Rhode Island. So in the effort to bring more education to the IRCC committee about some of these ongoing audit activities, we wanted to bring Mike here to give an overview. And Angela is also on the call. She's our controller and AVP for financial operations. So she's Mike's kind of main point of contact in all of these audit efforts. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Abby. Can you remind me just how much time before the meeting?
I think technically we have till 4:30.
Oh, okay.
Is that true, Matt?
Yeah, I believe so. You don't have to go to 4:30, but yeah, if you want to, I think we can.
I won't. I just want to make sure I have 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Mike Johns, and I'm a principal with CLA. And really the agenda for today, as Abby alluded to, is to discuss both the scopes, or what are we doing in this thing called a single audit, or the NCAA agreed upon procedures, and then the results of those engagements as they relate to the university. So just a very brief background on what a single audit is. A single audit is required when any non-federal entity receives federal aid of more than $750,000. And what the Single Audit Act says is if you're getting that aid, not only are you required to have a financial statement audit, and that's what I presented on a couple of months ago, you're required to have a compliance audit on your federal programs. So those two things are a little bit different. The financial statement audit, we're performing tests to ensure the accuracy of your balance sheet and your income statement, the year-end financial statements. In a compliance audit, we're testing compliance with federal grants and contracts. And some examples of those tests I have on this slide. Allowable costs are the expenses we're charging to those grants allowable per their terms. Reporting, are reports required to be sent back to the federal granting agency? And if so, are we completing them appropriately and on time? Procurement, if we have to procure for goods and services, are we meeting the federal regulations related to that? So different than a financial statement audit, but required when you receive in excess of that $750,000 of federal awards. The audit does not include every single federal grant that the university receives. There's a whole checklist and set of rules as to which grants do need audit. It's based on their dollar amount. It's based on how long it's been since they've last been audited, risk factors. We won't bore everyone with that, but we only audit what are called these major programs, not every grant. And that's why it's called the single audit. Years and years and years ago, every grant had to be audited. It was a compliance nightmare. So they came out with this act that simplified how many grants need an audit each and every year. So the major programs, it's a little bit different in Rhode Island in that CLA does not select your major programs. In most cases, CLA will select the major programs of its higher education clients. Rhode Island, the university's major programs are selected by the Auditor General. So they tell CLA, they tell me which programs need to be audited. We perform that audit and then send a report back to the state stating the results of that audit. And then they include those results along with all the federal awards of the university in the state's single audit report, which is submitted to the federal government. Federal compliance supplement, that's our playbook. It's what the federal agencies tell the auditors what they want tested as it relates to the various major programs. This year, the state selected the Student Financial Aid Cluster. That's your largest federal award, and that's the program that was selected for testing this year that we'll be reporting on to the state. Happy to report we'll be issuing an unmodified opinion on compliance. That's the highest level of assurance we can provide as independent auditors. With a compliance audit, with the Single Audit Act, when we do come across findings, they are required to be reported in a schedule in the back of our audit report called the Schedule of Findings and Question Costs. We did identify one finding this year. It was not significant enough to warrant the modification of our opinion, but again, per the rules, we still had to report it in our audit report. And it relates to the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA Act, and that is a federal rule that governs protection of PII as it relates to customers, or in our case, students. There were some new regulations put into place this year. I believe they were required to be adopted as of June, so right before the university's fiscal year end. And what the federal government asked us as independent auditors to test is that there was a written policy and set of procedures in place that covered what they consider 6 major elements of this law. And as of June 30th, 2023, the University of Rhode Island had a draft policy, but an official policy had not been finalized and adopted and put into place. So that is going to be reported as an audit finding in the single audit report. The single audit is due 9 months after fiscal year end. So for the university, that is March 31st. The state has asked that we provide our report mid-February, which we are on target of meeting that deadline. They will then be responsible for submitting the state's entire single audit in accordance with that 9-month deadline. And if anyone has any questions, please just yell out. I don't see everyone's camera, so I won't see any hands waving, but please just yell out. NCAA agreed upon procedures. So when you have your athletic programs, you're required to have what's called an agreed upon procedures report. So this is substantially less in scope than an audit. Each year, the NCAA puts out a handbook and says, we want an independent accountant to perform these procedures. And they list the 50 or 60 procedures they want done. And it all relates back to a schedule of athletic revenues and athletic expenses at the university. So university management will put together a schedule of all the revenues we collect and all the expenditures as it relates to our various athletic programs. We then come in and are engaged to perform these 40, 50, 60 tests that the NCAA requires on that report. However, we express no opinion. With an agreed upon procedures engagement, we perform the tests and we then spell out if we had any findings as a result of that test. We don't issue an opinion on that statement of revenues and expenditures. And the original intent of this report was to help presidents and those charged with governance at universities to understand the economics behind the athletic programs. The results of our procedures and there are a lot of procedures, we only had one finding, and it isn't an uncommon one in our experience in higher education. But one of the required procedures is that we compare the budgeted expenditures as presented on that statement of revenues and expenses to actual and explain any significant differences. The requirements from the NCAA for that statement are different than what the internal accounting chart of accounts reports on. So the budget is not at a level of detail that supports comparison. So we just note the fact that we couldn't perform that procedure because the budget at the university isn't in that level of detail. And I have seen that at many organizations. It's just, some don't find it necessary to budget down to that level of detail. That report was completed and issued on January 5th, and that was well in advance of the deadline, which is January 15th. Those are the end of my planned remarks. Be more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Well, this is
Go
on
ahead,
the NCAA. You found the finding. You suggest that it happens a lot of different places. Any recommendation? Do we need to have those figures in the future, or we don't?
This report doesn't even get sent out to an external party. This is purely for the information of the university. The NCAA could come in and request to see it. That rarely happens. So I would say if we're comfortable how we're currently budgeting for our athletic programs, then I would not let this compliance requirement guide how we see the best way of budgeting for our programs. There will be no repercussions on the university.
All right. On the first audit, regarding the bigger grants, you said you got the nod from the state on which one to look for. Abby, did they get it right, the state, or do we have any others like that at that level that they missed?
I think the state, so if you may recall that we used to have our own internal audit function, and the state moved our auditors to the state. So really, we fall under their jurisdiction around what we audit and what we don't. And that's why they're the ones that are choosing what to look at. I think the financial aid program is a good program with significant federal support. So really, it's financial aid and research are two areas where we get most of our
But that was the only one that needed to be looked at.
Per the Rhode Island auditor.
All
So
right,
we
the
took our direction.
smaller ones, do we run our own compliance to make sure that we're in compliance with all of them?
So I would say you just heard from Elizabeth and Bethany. So there's a lot of work they do on research related compliance. And then, yeah, we have our own kind of internal controls within our controller's office under Angela to make sure that we're following requirements
So
for
there's
federal.
someone, you have someone overseeing the grant.
Absolutely, yeah. This is just an opportunity for an external review, which we find really important to make sure that any issues are identified.
Okay.
So we're thankful for CLA's work.
I would
And again,
just
I
add-
don't think that the board hasn't seen these before. Really, you just saw in the past, you saw the audited financial statements, but since we do engage CLA on these three reviews / audits, in talking to President Parlange, we thought it would be useful to share them with this committee.
Look, having dealt with federal grants in the business that I was in all my life, yeah, we want to dot our i's as we do, cross our t's. Change of administration, that's when they usually come in and say, okay, what did you do with the grants? And we just want to make sure we're on top of everything. That's all.
I would just add to that. Thank you. I very much appreciate that comment,
Yeah.
Armand. And we're starting internally just some desk audits across our different areas in integrity as well as sponsored research because of kind of by previous institutions, we would go through, basic uniform guidance audits and through the single audit. And we have as Abby just explained, a different model here where the state picks the areas for testing. So I think for our own internal controls, we should be doing desk audits.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a side note, I do think that the, if they haven't already, the Student Life and Athletics Committee should get a copy of that NCAA audit, just for their reference. It's probably good for them to have. Any other questions for Mike? Hearing none, Mike, thank you for your work on this and all the other audits that you do. It's, we're always glad to have you. Our next order of business, and I actually don't even think we have to do this, right? Because it's not technically, do I have to call for an adjournment?
Yes, you still adjourn.
I do, okay.
Still a vote.
All right, then, that is the next order of business is adjournment. Do I have a motion? Can't leave.
Am I allowed to do it? Joe, I think Joe has to do it.
Has to do it.
Motion to adjourn. Joe Formicola.
Awesome.
Boy, Joe.
Great, and second,
You
the
can
second have to
second.
be me?
You can, you
All
can.
right,
Matt,
all
you're a
right,
good
sounds good.
chair.
Okay, good meeting.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
All right, folks, well, that ends today's meeting. The next meeting of the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee is scheduled for April 4th, 2024. You guys all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
See you, everybody. Thanks, Matt.